I was about to be promoted and was offered a position to be the medical director. And at that time, I realized that I was climbing up a ladder, but the ladder was up against the wrong building.
Three, two, one. Liftoff.
Welcome back to the Ketamine Startup Podcast. This is where we talk about how to start a ketamine clinic, marketing, and more. And today's episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Over the past season and the first season, we've shared a lot of stories from people in this industry. And today we're going to share ours.
Yeah, this is kind of our creation story of how we got to be where we got to be. So I'm going to give you the behind the scenes of how you are here listening to us on our podcast.
So when did you start thinking about opening a clinic? Because it was kind of Sam who decided this is what we're going to do, or we need to do something different. So was there like a breaking point? Was there something that just made you realize, I want to do something different?
I think I've always known that I was going to do something differently. And that's one of the reasons I got an MBA during my medical educational experience. And it was either working in a large healthcare organization was my initial vision. And I tried doing that route. There was an opportunity roughly around 2015, 2016, where I was given a promotion. So I was an associate medical director of an emergency department. And then I was about to be promoted and was offered a position to be the medical director. And at that time, I realized that I was climbing up a ladder, but the ladder was up against the wrong building. And it was kind of a big deal because I thought that was my dream and vision. But when I looked ahead, I was like, I don't know if I want to climb this ladder and be at the top of this building necessarily. So I took a leap with Kim's help where we said, hey, let's do something a little bit creative. Let's do something a little bit out there and take a risk, take the leap, choose the road less traveled. And that was in 2017 range when we incorporated and decided to open up the practice.
At that time, you were doing per diem at 3 different locations, and you were also you were kind of this middle manager type too. So it was just like a really interesting time. Plus, you were juggling starting our clinic and all that.
Yeah, I was working part-time at a few ERs, which was nice because I had a ton of flexibility with my schedule. I could give certain shifts or days, and I knew that certain days I would definitely have off. So I think that was really flexible. And I think, what were you doing at that time?
I wasn't working full time. I was working, basically full time, but the least amount I could work in order to still keep our benefits and our health insurance so that you could be flexible with per diem. And so, I just kept doing that. Plus, I knew I would be more of an administrator, marketer for the clinic. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and you've kind of thought about going into the business world because your undergraduate degree was in business. How did you decide to choose business as your background or your major?
I thought it was going to be the easiest one. I'll be honest with you. It seemed like a lot of the people that went into the business department, they seemed like they're having fun. They had the most free time. And because I'm not a huge science person, I like science fiction, but I'm not necessarily into memorizing for the sake of memorizing, the genus, phylum, all that kind of stuff for like biology. I was like, well, I'll need more time to work on the big four for getting into med school. So why don't I do something easy? And then luckily I found out that I actually enjoyed all of my business classes. And it just so happened to, work out that it worked out that way.
Yeah, and I remember during B school, I found it was a lot of like the tools and direct application. So we would learn something and then apply it immediately. Whereas with medical school, for me, it just felt like a ton of memorization. And at the time, at least in med school, I wasn't necessarily applying it. It was just memorizing the initial vocabulary of med school. But in B school, it was literally like case studies and group projects, so we could apply it directly. So I found that really useful and enjoyed the business side and the tools, which Turns out to be a really useful tool to open up your own practice. And not, I don't think everyone has to go to B school. I think being a physician or a clinician, like that's already hard enough. And, they say that the best way to learn a business is to actually just open one up, whether that's a lemonade stand, like you're going to learn more from that than actually going to B school. Unless you want to get into one of these like high leverage consulting gigs where the B school ends up being like kind of a screening process for those jobs. But going back to our story, we were deciding taking the road less traveled, and we took a leap.
Well, I mean, but why? I guess that's the thing.
But
Why were we
why?
even trying to consider that?
I think you're reading. We're both reading a book. It's called The Five Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom, and he talks about when we think about the word wealth, we think about financial wealth. But then there's other types of wealth. There's like time wealth. There's social wealth. There's physical health as a form of wealth. There's a mind, having a healthy mind as a form of wealth. And financial is one piece of that. So I think the traditional route would have been financially very wealthy because they were paying a ton of money to be a medical director at that time. But I would lose the time wealth and my physical wealth and my emotional, mental health and wealth. So I had to do some trade offs. And so opening up a ketamine clinic, I get a ton of flexibility. I get to create my own schedule. I get to be the captain of my own ship and not be a middle manager who is beholden to people above me who aren't necessarily clinicians, which I also found challenging. So, working in the ER is tough, right? Just the clinical skills and having a waiting room full of patients. And no matter how many patients I saw, it felt like the waiting room just never got emptied out until 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So that was challenging. And now I don't have to work those night shifts. I choose not to unless I'm really required. But I had to do the ER work part time for several years, even after we opened up the clinic. I remember we opened up in 2018. That's when we started seeing patients. And then I was working in the ER for a good 2 to 3 years, even after we opened part time still.
Was it like December
Around December
2020?
2020. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, I think, my last ER shift at the local level one trauma center that I worked at. I remember, yeah, it was kind of a bittersweet feeling because I was like, yep, it was right around the pandemic and right when I think there was one of the more contagious, virulent strains of it. And I was like, I don't want to get sick. I was just seeing a bunch of the COVID patients. And this is before, we knew all, what we know about COVID now, but it was kind of a scary time. And I think at that time you had also transitioned from part-time to no clinical work.
No, I mean, so it was pregnancy basically and and a worldwide pandemic to have me fully leave. With ophthalmology, there was a handful of things during the pandemic that required like had to be done, urgent things. So I was able to like use not only my maternity leave because so I took maternity leave like February 2020, had her kid in March, and then I was then on maternity leave, and then they were asking, "Is anybody willing to self furlough?" And I was like, "Sure," and I was like, "I could still keep all my benefits. Sure, I'm not getting paid, but they just because clinics were closed, unless it was an eye emergency, they were closed, and so it just kind of worked out. And then things went a little bit more, it became more normal. I had our kid, and it just wasn't a good fit anymore. There are certain systems that are in place in healthcare organizations that are supportive for particular types of individuals. So for others that may not fit that mold, and a young mother is not that mold that it was being supported at that time. I'm not sure, but maybe at that organization now it's different. But even though it was so frustrating at that time, I'm really grateful that it was that frustrating because it made it easier for me to leave. I mean, of course, now I can say that in retrospect. I mean, before I was just like, I don't get it. If they just did this, if they just had somebody cover my call or would help me with this, if they would understand, if they could move these things around for me, and that I'd be happy and I continue to work. But, realizing now that I was doing work that I wasn't really excited about. I was good at what I did. Patients were very happy with me. I had great patient satisfaction scores. My surgeries came out well. Everything was like good, except I just wasn't happy. My mental wealth, my physical wealth wasn't there. And then I was trying to think like how could I balance even taking care of our kid and then also being there fully present for my patients. So it just kind of worked out that I mean, of course, now, what hindsight's 2020, but I'm glad things just became unbearable and it didn't work out. Perhaps fate, the universe, whatever your higher call or higher power that you believe in, it just worked out for me. So you were already using ketamine a lot as procedural sedation. I remember going into the ER to do eye exam on kids, and what would they use? It'd be ketamine. And I'd always like one of our opto questions was like, which one of these anesthetic drugs causes an increase in IOP? And I already knew it was ketamine and all that stuff. So we were already familiar with ketamine. This is what 2020, 2017. We're starting to think about opening a clinic, but I mean, where there was something about you finding about ketamine beyond just procedural sedation.
Well, I've been using ketamine for a long time for procedures. So, looking back retrospectively, when I was a college student, I did research and on animals. And I was working at University of Washington at the time. I think it was my junior and senior year of college. And I was administering ketamine to these animals for these various procedures and research projects that we were doing. I did not even know that ketamine was a potential psychedelic entheogenic type of medication. And then when I went to medical school, the specialty that most resonated with me out of all the specialties was emergency medicine. And then lo and behold, emergency physicians, we use ketamine for our patients all the time. The location where I did my residency is also where a ton of ketamine research for procedural sedation was done. So during my regular residency training, I was administering ketamine all the time. And it was just one of my favorite drugs to administer because it would preserve the majority of the time their respiratory function. It would increase their blood pressure, especially when I'm dealing with like hypotensive patients, like ICU patients or I know they're going to be going to the ICU and they're hypotensive. I need to use a medication that's not going to drop their blood pressure, that's not going to drop their oxygen levels. So I was administering a ton of it. And then I came across an article published by Dr. Berman, Berman et al., and his colleagues, I think out of Yale. This was published in Biological Psychiatry in 2000. They took a really small sample size, I think maybe 10 or 11 patients. It was very small. They did a randomized, placebo-controlled, blinded study to see if ketamine can be effective for treating treatment-resistant depression. And in that study, it was a very small sample size again, but they saw robust benefits. And because I worked in the ER, I would see all of these patients who were on these like 72-hour psychiatric holds in the state of California. That's called a 5150. And I just thought, maybe we can use the ketamine for these patients with suicidal thoughts as an option. But, because it was so cutting edge, there was a lot of resistance. People were like, no, we're not doing that. No, that's not the standard of care. And then it just sparked. I was like, all right, maybe I just need to open up a practice and just do this on my own. And it'll give me that freedom and flexibility and autonomy that I really value in my life.
Do you recall how you came across that article, that study?
I think it was just one of these random email newsletters. I'm
Mhm.
subscribed to all these emails that come and they give like weekly or monthly digest summaries, and it just randomly popped up. And that's when I did a deep dive into the research. Like, really, like, okay, let's look at the RCTs, let's look at the meta analyses, the systematic reviews, et cetera, because that's what I'm trained in. At least at my med school, they really emphasize evidence based medicine. And so when I saw all of the evidence, I was like, this evidence is really robust. It's good trials, it's high quality. And the sample sizes were typically small because it is not funded by a giant pharmaceutical company. But given that, I mean, the data was really strong.
So it seemed like we were finding this article. We're already starting to feel like a need to try something out, something different, going out on our own. Because I know we had a lot of conversations about let's figure out something different, either outside of medicine as a side hustle. And 'cause, I mean, we were even looking into like what drop shipping,
Yeah,
and
we
we
were
were
doing
reading like
some
the
yeah,
4 Hour Work Week. We were like ready to do like life physician coaching. We were doing all these other stuff. And then it was just kind of like, I guess it was one of those email newsletter or those throwaway journals that you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, the physician coaching is really interesting because that is a business that we considered, and I even had a website. And I remember we took all the coaching classes, and it was CTI Coaches Training Institute, which is one of the largest, oldest coaching organizations. And we took that course,
Also known as coactive.
also known as coactive coaching model. And so that came in incredibly useful for what we do now, which is consulting with other clinicians, because we take some of those same tools and skill sets and apply it to working with our clients, doctors who want to start up a ketamine clinic or want to add ketamine to their practice.
Or even with their patients. I mean, I always apply the same stuff when I was seeing my patients.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just learning communication skills. I think that was really helpful. But yeah,
Yeah.
so it was this like intersection of us currently or being unhappy with the current positions that we were in. And then you stumble upon this article. You did the deep dive. And then, so you're like juggling 3 different hospitals that you're working at, were we an LLC or an S corp at that time? Who knows? You were filling out all those different forms, and we're looking for locations and
Yeah. Talking with
talking to
attorneys,
attorneys. You're
looking
just
up
doing
real
all those things.
estate,
Yeah,
leases, negotiating. It was, yeah, just using my free time to work on the clinic and the development of the clinic. But there was no blueprint.
yeah, there
And
wasn't.
there was not a lot of people doing it. And, I would try reaching out to other clinics, but it was basically cold calling people, other clinicians who were doing it. And no one was at the time very receptive to helping at the time. So, I mean, there were a handful, but it was really DIY. And so
We DIY'd it.
we spent like a good 2 years because it's really the intersection of something, novel, i.e., ketamine therapy, plus creating a business.
Yeah.
And so it was like the business skill set combined with innovative that was challenging to really do and put into place. But I think having a good team, so Kim
Yeah.
has kind of a
Yeah.
different perspective,
We
sometimes
couldn't
180-degree
we
perspective.
couldn't be more different on how we approach things.
Yeah, we're very different in our perspectives, which I think is really useful. So for anyone
But
who's thinking about starting up a clinic, is like, yeah, you don't want to get people who are exactly like you. You want to get people who have a different archetype. We talk about this in one of our podcast episodes, is like the 3 archetypes who open up a business and who are crucial for a business. I think having those 3 archetypes in the business is really essential. So yeah, I think you were a big part of it because there was a time when I mean, I was decently content with working part-time at a few different ERs. I had complete control of my schedule in a way, a little bit of autonomy. So I had created it, but you were pretty unhappy and you were like,
well, I was just like,
no, we
"This is
need
my
to,
ticket out. This is my ticket out."
yeah, you were like, we need to open this up. And I was like, well, it's really hard to find a place. Like, let's just put it on the back burner. We'll do it in a year or two. And you're like, no, we need to do it this year. And so there was definitely a lot of pressure because, yeah, you lit the fire under our butts to get this thing going. I would say even
Yeah.
at the beginning or right
Oh,
at that
yeah.
turning point, because that's so weird how,
There's like
we're
a build
building,
up.
building,
Yeah.
building, building. And then the last like 5% of completing it is actually the
Oh,
most
that
amount
is
of work.
so hard. That
Yeah,
is
they say
so
that when
hard.
you're working on a project, like the first 90% is easy. It's just the last 10% is hard, or much harder. So this will be really interesting when you're opening up your practice. You're gonna be like, yeah,
Mm,
this is easy. We got this. We got this. But the final like completion, like
yeah.
the last 10%, like for some reason that is just harder. There's just a lot more.
Oh, with the finish line so close. There's part of me, there's that steam that just lets out. But for me, it wasn't, because maybe it was. I mean, this was like the good thing about me not seeing all the work that you were doing. To me, I was just like, sure, Sam's working on stuff, but I don't see a clinic location and I don't see you seeing patients. So then how are we going to justify to ourselves at least leaving? Because most importantly is coming to a place of, a peace, or being like, no, this is what I'm doing within yourself, right? And so it was kind of like, for me, it was like, I need to see something that is concrete, that is going to work, because I really, Sam shared the data with me about the research, and we're like, hey, this is great. It's aligned with what you're able to do. I'm great with spreadsheets. I can I didn't know how to do marketing then, but I already knew how to like do social media posts. I knew how to edit video. I was like, all right, I think we could do something there. But it was like I needed to see we have to have a physical location. So I think that pushed us for that last
Yeah, the
5%. To
physical
your
location.
annoyance, I know you were there was some
Well, as
yes.
we were speaking about this, a metaphor came to me, and I love metaphors. But I think about like, let's say there's a chicken, and you have the chicken in the egg shell, and it's like incubating, it's growing internally within the shell. But the hardest part for that chicken to come out is breaking through the shell,
Mm,
right? It's the
yeah.
hardest part. Like the internal, like it's there's no resistance. But then when that chicken has to finally peck its way out of that shell, like that's a ton of work. And in a way, building a clinic, it's like, yeah, it's incubating. You can't see it
Mhm.
physically. It just looks like there's nothing happening, but there's stuff happening inside of the egg. And then that final 5 to 10%, it's like literally cracking out of the shell.
I was literally pecking at you
Yeah,
and the
I
shell.
guess you were that hen that's like, hey, let me just help you. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
we're
peck,
both
peck, peck.
peck.
Help
Yeah,
the
we were
baby
inside of the
the
shell, like
shell.
nothing is visible until it becomes visible. And then the other thing that I want to mention is right around the time, psychedelics were also getting to be,
Mm,
quite well known in a way. I mean, for example, like there was the Psychedelic Science Conference in Oakland, California. I think that was in 2017. And like there was that whole quote renaissance occurring. I know some people have differing opinions on the word renaissance, but there was, kind of a resurgence or an interest. Like MAPS had been working on MDMA, FDA approvals for PTSD and veterans. So there was like this thing in the cultural zeitgeist where psychedelics slash entheogenics for treating mood disorders was becoming a thing. It was quite popular in a way. And then, yeah, I think 2023, the MAP Psychedelic Science Conference was like, they were right on the verge of getting FDA approval, or they thought they were going to. And it was just like the biggest conference ever. So the bottom line was inside of the culture that we were in at the time, like this was also a thing where it was, I
mhm.
mean, ketamine was one part of that like road that was being developed in the psychedelic space.
And I think that's why too I felt very confident that if we got that location, if we opened up, if this was in the cultural zeitgeist, all these things about psychedelics and ketamine being something that was induced non-ordinary states and is legal and is can be very safe if done in a proper set or setting. I was like, this is a no-brainer. And especially I'm like, there will be demand and there is currently minimal supply. And I was like, this makes sense. So get that location. Peck, peck, peck. Like, we need to get this going. Just so distinctly remember that I'm just like, we need to do this. Hey, listeners, this is Kim, and I just want to acknowledge that you're here for a reason. Maybe you're stuck in a cycle of long shifts, feeling a little burnt out, and wondering if there's any other way to practice medicine, especially on your own terms. We've been there, and that's exactly why we created this free checklist, your step-by-step roadmap to starting a ketamine clinic without those costly mistakes. Grab your copy now at www.ketaminestartup.com/checklist. It's completely free because we want you to succeed, not struggle. And hey, if you're driving or mid-workout, don't sweat it. Just check out the show notes for the link when you're ready. And again, that's www.ketaminestartup.com/checklist. Now let's get back to the episode.
The other thing is we had a safety net. And the safety
Mm,
net, we always knew that worst case scenario, the clinic does fail and we have no patients. Like I can always go back to working in the emergency department, or you can always go back to ophthalmology. Like I think
yeah,
having a license, having a degree, having credentials, like even if it doesn't work out, like we knew that the
yeah,
safety net was not that bad. I mean, like I had a
yeah,
feeling that I could always go back and become some
yeah,
administrator of some hospital or ER. Like for some reason, I was just like, I have an MD. I've had experience. Like I can always go back to that if this project and this business doesn't work out. And you
yeah,
had that too because you maintain your board certification still in
yeah,
ophthalmology, so you can always we still have that
yeah.
backup. And for anyone who's listening, like know that your backup, it's still like you can always go back and work in the hospital or the OR or the ER or whatever it may be. Like there's that safety net will always be there in a way.
Yeah. I mean, it's an absolute privilege. And I mean, how lucky are we for those who are listening that if you're, yes, you could be unhappy or frustrated working at a hospital or working at a clinic as an employee, but your services, your skill set, the fact that you have a license, the physician or what other healthcare, allied health or whatever it may be, like you can still find work if you need to, if this doesn't work out. And working out too means like, financially it didn't work out, or you do it and you're going, this is great, but it's not for me. I'm more happy with the way life was before. Like, and so it's like, honestly, it's like a win-win. And I don't think other people in other industries are as lucky or as fortunate of having such a lovely safety net. And yet on the other hand, that safety net can also look like golden handcuffs. And I think that was why I feel so lucky that for me, I could say that how things played out in 2020 helped me jump and like take that leap, because I know people had lots of words to say about us first even starting in clinic, and we were still working in the hospital. I mean, you were getting some flack.
Yeah, it's true, because I was talking about opening up a ketamine clinic. I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And, I talked about it for like a couple years, and people like you share in other
Mhm.
stories in the past. It's like, hey, Sam, when are you going to open up your ketamine clinic? And because I had talked about it and it
Yeah.
was not visible, it was all invisible work. There was nothing to show for it. And because we do that a lot, right? And I do that still. Like I say, I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to go whatever, like I'm going to go run a marathon. And we can say it. It's much easier to say it than to actually do it. And I think that was a bit of pressure when I started saying it to people. And then finally people were like, hey, I thought you were going to be opening up a ketamine clinic. Like, when's that happening? And it's like, yeah, we're still doing XYZ and looking for space or whatever it may be. So I think the social pressure also plays a role,
Oh, and
but
helping break
in
through.
helping break
Yeah.
through. So there was that piece where there was social pressure, but then there was also social pressure to not open up a ketamine clinic in a way too, because people are like, that's a drug that you're getting people addicted. You're a charlatan. Like, there's not enough evidence for it. Like, ketamine is a terrible drug. So there was also people who were anti opening up, or even psychiatrists or psychologists or other specialties just saying, no, you shouldn't do that. Stay in your lane. You don't know what you're doing. I mean, it's definitely there. A lot of resistance. And this was back in the days. I feel like there's less now because the number of ketamine clinics that are open, which we've
But
also played a part
yeah.
in.
But I mean, I would also argue that there continues to be a lot of criticism and negativity around those who go into this field, just because there are more clinics, in the sense of like what I've noticed is like, oh, you're just going to be another person that opens up some other place to churn and burn patients.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it's like
There's
there's
still resistance, but not as much. I would say there's a little bit less. I mean, there's now insurance companies that are approving of
That's
ketamine
true.
therapy. There's professional liability companies
That's
who are
true.
like, yeah, we can cover you. Like, there's still friction, but less. And I think maybe that's just the way society progresses, like
Mhm.
little, micro advances at a time, like gradual. I think about like a river flowing and then like eventually tearing down the rock or breaking down like
Mm.
just one splash and wave after another. Like, it will gradually meet less resistance with time.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, the fact that insurances are slowly starting to cover it. I mean, if
Yeah, it's a big
insurance, and
deal.
those are a slow moving industry, but I think it's also just a reflection of, medicine is slow to change. And some of this slow to change is related to folks' biases or beliefs, emotions surrounding using a medication in a certain way. Because we can talk about other drugs that are out there that have been used, like, and because it's not in that psychedelic non-ordinary state, oh wow, that's such a great idea. Like something that we used to use really super commonly for like eyes was Avastin. So it's a drug that we would inject to the eye that would get rid of all these tiny small bleeding blood vessels. Totally has revolutionized the lives of those with like wet AMD or like diabetic retinopathy. Before, if you got that, it was like a death sentence for your vision. You were blind. But then somebody thought, hey, they were, thinking outside of the box. They were like, let's look at this. This is an anti-VEGF medication. And this medication at that time was being used as a colon cancer drug. And so the fact that they were able to figure something out, like, hey, it's one medication that can be used in a novel way. But because it was like something straightforward, like with vision, I feel like it was much more accepted. Sure, there was this criticism and whatnot. I feel like there's a lot more criticism in this realm if you're kind of like not on board and are open to non-ordinary states of consciousness in the healing of traumatic events or psychedelics. The idea of having a medication that is used in one way in medicine, but used in this other way. A lot of folks, I mean, are like, whoa. And so, I mean, I think
Uh,
part of it was part of the pushback was that whole
yeah.
idea of like, this isn't what we do.
Well, maybe there's a stigma or bias against anything that causes mind altering, cognition
Yeah.
altering substances, except for like the allowed ones, which is caffeine
Mhm.
and alcohol. Like those are allowed, those are accepted by society, but anything else outside of those are not accepted. So, yeah, I think big picture, zooming out, I think there is a societal resistance to things that change people's minds in a dramatic way. I think it's true, and that was the whole thing in the 1960s and 70s, and even
Mm,
before that, in the
yeah.
1920s and 30s with anti-marijuana laws, and then in the 60s and 70s, people were using LSD, but then it made them not want to go to the Vietnam War, and it made them like think globally, and it's like, okay, well, we need soldiers to fight in these wars. They don't want to fight because they're taking this substance. Let's make that illegal. They can only use the approved, socially approved, which is, hey, on a Friday night, go drink a six pack of beer with your buddies. That's acceptable. Go smoke your cigarettes. That's acceptable. Drink caffeine, coffee. That's acceptable. That's going to make you more productive. But then there's certain substances or medications that are like, that is not acceptable because you're going to think differently or you're going to behave differently, maybe challenge the status quo.
Yeah. I mean, you could even argue that those substances that you mentioned just supports the status quo.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's like, well, this is something that this whole category of medications and treatments that alter the mind could actually alter society. And so, I mean that's a whole other
Yeah.
episode
And
in itself.
it is because, I mean, we are seeing in our society, like rising rates of depression, rising rates of anxiety, rising incidences of suicide. So it's like, well, why is this happening? Like, are we just diagnosing it more, or is there something in the water of society that's causing increased mental health conditions? And who knows? It's multifactorial. But what's great is that we have options now and more options in the pipeline that will be available. And my hope is in the future, like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, like there will be a revolution in consciousness, I guess, for a society, which will take time. I mean, there's this classic article, I think it's published in the JAMA or New England Journal of Medicine, and they said that it takes like 17 years for research to be
Mm,
translated into clinical application on average. So 17 years. So if there's something that, some groundbreaking revolution that occurs, 17 years later, it's finally going to get accepted. And I just found that statistic very fascinating, how the the inertia, the slow moving and resistance to change in a healthcare system, which has its pros and cons because we don't want to jump on any and every bandwagon that comes on. But yeah, there is just a natural resistance. But I think in a society, we always need outliers, people
yeah.
who are on the cutting edge, because that's how we advance.
Oh, totally. Because if not, maybe it would be like 20 years
Yeah,
from
I
research
mean, if
or
there were people who
30
weren't
years.
just doing wacky things 100,000 years
Yeah.
ago, like, I mean, we would just be stuck. So we do need, as a tribe or as a herd of like people just doing wacky things and crazy things, and some of them are going to fail and some of them are going to work, and each time it's just a little mini experiment.
So going back to like that whole like fail or fear of things not working out, starting a clinic. When we first started out, and just bring it back to the story of things versus less philosophical. So that first year, even that first couple years, it was kind of slow. And so, maybe more like that first year, first 6 months. What would you say? It's like more
Yeah, I would say the first year, first
first
six. I
year.
mean,
Yeah,
yeah, it was very slow. The first month, we mentioned this before. I think I did 4 treatments. Fortunately, I kept the overhead really, really low, so it was a non-issue. I was like, yeah, well, if we see patients, great. And if we don't, like, I'm not paying that much in my lease, so that was fine. And I didn't have any staff. Maybe I had like some volunteer nurses who were helping
mm,
me, but yeah, and family members helping, but it was a very lean operation. So even though it was slow, it was still sustainable. And I continued working in the
yeah.
emergency department. So we had that
So
financial cushion.
it wasn't even. I mean, would you even say it was a leap?
Oh, I mean, I think it was a leap because it's like, I mean, there was skin in the game. Like when
Yeah.
someone signs a lease, when I signed the lease for, hey, for the next 2 years, I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars, no matter
Mhm.
what, or else, you can sue me. But I didn't want to get sued, of course. So it's like, yeah, there's that skin in the game. Or when you plunk down 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 to like do a build out of a clinic, that's skin in the game. So I think there is a leap that occurs, and it's a financial leap, it's a psychological leap, it's a legal leap. So the leap can definitely exist, in my opinion. What do you think?
I feel like we've been so fortunate. I mean, we've had fun. We've been able to help so many people. We've met so many lovely people on this journey. To me, it was like the natural progression and versus the leap. But I guess it was a bit of a leap, like you're saying, with all that. If it hits the fan, we're gonna tap into our savings and our retirement. But I just think like we knew to keep things very lean. We almost played it like chess or just planned it out. Sure, there's a lot of things that are out of our control at that time and always is out of our control. But it felt like, okay, we keep things lean. We just play it smart. We still keep our positions at the other hospitals just in case. And so, we're open just by appointment only. And so it was like, we gave ourselves space. We structured our business in such a way that even though it was scary when we're just like our overhead was more than how much money we brought in, it was like, it's okay. It's only 1 month. Okay. It's only been 2 months or 3 months. I think we just understood and we came into it with our eyes wide open enough. And yet I find like when you sometimes start something and you worked really hard, you're just like, I don't know, maybe we're like glass half full folks because we're just like, you know what? We're going to beat the odds. We're going to be open in a year. We're going to be open in 5 years. And so just I mean, and also we were just really passionate about like we really believed that this was going to be it was aligned with our why. And I know we talk a lot about our why. We have like whole I think we had a whole episode on our why, or if not, this is just something we constantly talk about. Like you gotta have a strong why. Because if you're just doing it for the money, you'll get freaked out that first 2, 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the why, and for me, the why is, hey, I want to provide something for patients because it's very transformational, because it's incredibly rewarding when I see that person who's tried X, Y, and Z, and this medicine and that treatment and this, and they're hopeless and they're suffering. It's like if I can offer them something, and it's not 100%, of course, but if we can give them that hope and the possibility of healing, like that in itself is incredibly rewarding. I've helped a ton of people in the ER. I've done some really cool stuff in the emergency room, whether it's intubating or post cardiac arrest. But in a way, sometimes I feel like I've helped more patients at the ketamine clinic. And that in itself is very rewarding. And not necessarily like a financial thing, but just like an emotional, spiritual nourishment of seeing someone get better. And it's very different from the ER because I would just see the patients for maybe however long my shift is, and then I'm done. And I either discharge them home or they get admitted to the ICU or the telemetry floor, whatever it may be, or they go to surgery. It was a very short term interaction. Whereas with Ketamine Clinic, I am forming these long term relationships with some of our patients, and they're like, our patients are really cool. Like I enjoy working with them. They're getting better. They're getting results, and seeing how their lives have changed and transformed, knowing that I've played a small part in that is very rewarding.
And it's all rewarding helping change a person's life, especially, going through all this medical training to have somebody who was on the brink of death in some cases for you and resuscitating them or pulling out the bead out of some little kid's nose who was like scared and his parents are scared and all that kind of stuff and helping them like that. And I did so many cataracts and people who could not see. And yet at the same time, there's something really powerful about helping a person shift their perspective, like going back to those 5 types of wealth. There's like we made them a little bit more wealthy in the physical sense by helping them as traditional doctors. But then now doing what we do now and with ketamine therapy, it's like we're making them a little bit more wealthy in like a spiritual mindset way, which is like totally different and yet also very rewarding because like helping a person you put back together physically, but then also to help them be able to get back or reset back to their the wonderful, naturally creative, resourceful, and whole individual that they are is something hugely powerful because it's like there's just it has this ripple effect. And for me, that's what like because for me, the course and the marketing and educating patients and then educating healthcare providers, for me, it's like it's beautiful to see their lives change by understanding this information or having their perspective shift on, oh wow, that makes sense about how this could be useful, or oh wow, I'm not so freaked out about taking this leap and opening up a clinic, or oh, Kim and Sam are a resource that I can rely on so that now I can become more wealthy with my time, with being able to spend more time with my kids, or doing something that gets them back to feeling enriched and fulfilled.
Yeah, and the other thing is when I am seeing patients one on one, like that's a certain amount of impact I can make. And that kind of leads us to talking about the ketamine startup course and how that started in a way, because like one of the insights that I had is okay, I can only help a certain number of patients one on one at the clinic. Now, I could have either franchised and done the whole because people have approached me, they're like, hey, you have a really great business model. We said ketamine, let's franchise it. So that was one. Or I could just teach other clinicians. We could teach other clinicians how to open up their practices. And now that we've helped, I don't know, 20 plus clinics open up nationwide, like what's really cool about that for me is to know that, hey, we help this doctor or this other clinician or this psychiatrist or surgeon or anesthesiologist or PA or whoever it may be. And now they've opened up a clinic in a different state and now they're helping people. So it's like, we're helping the doctors and then now the doctors can help the patients. And now like if we multiply that, like the impact that we made is much more than the impact I could have made on a one-on-one patient to doctor type of relationship. And I still do that, but also having the consulting, coaching practice that we do with ketaminestartup.com and this podcast and all this, like we can help more clinicians.
Oh, totally. Because the common thing we get when folks ask us, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" And we're like, "Oh, we have a ketamine clinic, and oh yeah, we teach other licensed healthcare professionals how to start their own clinic." Like, the thing we get is they're like, "Wait, you're creating your own competition? You should franchise." And I get where people are coming from, and that to me is telling that they're playing the game for the financial wealth or their mind is in that space. But when I was practicing and I was working in the level one trauma centers with residents and med students, was like, I love teaching. I think my favorite things was seeing somebody I work with be happier because we changed something there, or to support another person that could then help more patients. And so this was just a natural progression of just like, oh, I'm really going to be doing what I really enjoy doing. Is like I know where these folks are at. I know I've gone through that same training. I've been through those hellish times in a hospital when things are just not going well and there's an administrator telling you, no, you can't do this. And you're just like, you need to come down to the clinic and see what's going on. We need to do this. This isn't right. And then just like being able to fully understand that, but then helping them be like, hey, you know what? There's other things you can do. And that other thing is start up a clinic. I love it when I see somebody who's taken our course, somebody who's listened to our podcast, and when they share, oh, when I'm like stressed out or freaked out, I know I can listen to you guys, or you guys get it. To me, being seen, acknowledged, understood, whether so small or very little type of thing, or something so big as like, I'm glad somebody out there gets why I left my prestigious position somewhere and started this small but beautiful little practice. And to me, that's huge.
Yeah, it's so rewarding seeing our students, and really my goal, and our goal is to help our students be like the best in this field. Like when I see one of our students publish a paper or start up something new or build a second clinic, like that makes me excited because I'm like, hey, I played a small role in that. And you and I were talking earlier is like, oh man, maybe we could be like the Harvard or
Mm.
Stanford of ketamine trainings and the actual nuts and bolts and logistics. Like that would be really cool where we create leaders in this field. And so that's what would be amazing. And, even it is already rewarding, but it is rewarding when we see our students go on and do some amazing things in the space.
Would you say that's like the legacy or the mission of what we do, or
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's
part
the
of it?
legacy, maybe it's part of my ego, but being like, yeah, I helped that really popular person, like, I helped them a little bit at the start of their career. Like, yeah, I mean, there's that selfish part of me that's, oh yeah, I played a role in their success. And but yeah, well, I want to create colleagues, I want to create experts and be a part of their expertise. And like that's just really cool to know that, hey, this person, they're doing some cutting edge stuff. They're helping a ton of patients. They're getting featured on articles or news reports or media. And it's like, yeah, we help them. And that's incredibly rewarding.
No, totally. I mean, for me, I think it's creating this community, whether it be resources, whether that's just emotional or, informational support. I think that is something that's for me, it's my part in this mission of what we're doing.
The other thing I want to mention is just coming up for me also, I'll just bring it up, is the meta skills. So what meta
Mm,
skills have you felt like you've learned or gained during this whole like roughly, 80 or 10-year process? And for those of you who don't know, like what is the meta skill?
you want to explain a meta skill, and then I can think of what the meta skills I want to share.
Yeah, so a meta skill, so meta means like beyond, skill obviously like something you learn. And so when a meta skill would be like, hey, if you learn how to make a website,
Hmm.
now you know how to make websites. So or that's a meta skill, like you
Right,
learning,
right.
like learning the skill set actually not applies to that one specific thing, but to multiple things. And so one example of this for me, I gave the website example, is like before we started up the ketamine practice, like we had mentioned, I was going to do like a life coaching for doctors, and I was going to be helping them. And one of the things I had to do was like make business cards and make websites. And I didn't know how to make a website, and I didn't want to pay someone to do it. So I learned how to make a website. And because I learned how to make a website now in that one area, like now I know how to make websites. And so
Yeah.
that's a meta skill that just compounds with time. So just learning it once will now be applied into multiple domains.
Shoot, I feel like everything I do is just one giant meta skill. When we were that month that we were only seeing 4 patients, we're and also, I mean, that was what, 2018, so YouTube, it wasn't considered one of, like, the great search engines that it is now. It was pre-acquisition with Google, being acquired by Google, and so learning how to make video, learning how to make a podcast, anything involving a spreadsheet. Dude, man, it's funny because 'cause I've learned these things actually, so it's not quite a meta skill, but learned how to make all these forms like profit and loss statements, cash flow, balance sheets, but during undergrad, but, you know, that is those skills of making those, tracking, bookkeeping, all that kinda stuff, that is something that can be translated into any business. But how about you, Sam? Besides your
Well,
website
I'm just thinking
making.
for the listeners, like when you
Yeah.
do embark upon this journey, like when you learn, don't think about it as like, oh, it's a waste of time,
Mm,
but think about it as I'm developing a meta skill, because now you can use that direct skill that you've learned and apply it to other avenues of your life. And I think,
totally.
so for me, sometimes I'm like, life is short, time is finite. Like, I don't want to waste my time doing that. Well, maybe it is actually a good time to,
Mm,
a good way to use your time, because now once you've picked it up once, you now know how to do that skill, and you can still outsource it to someone.
totally.
But now at least you know the basics and fundamentals. Like for example, like website, I know how to make it. I may not want to make it the next time, but I know the basic elements. I know how it works. I know how to, have it rank higher on Google SEO. Like I know these certain things that I never would have known if I hadn't done it, at least tried it once by myself.
Right. No, and you know what is possible or what to expect or how to know if whoever you're outsourcing, whoever you're paying to do it, if they've accomplished what you wanted them to accomplish because you've done it at some point or to a certain degree. Like I think that's the biggest thing too. Whether you're outsourcing something or not, having done a bit of it yourself, you can then know if it was done to the degree that you want it to. And especially while you're trying to keep your expenses low when you're first starting, you are wearing many hats.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about another meta skill is when I was in residency, I learned how to place ultrasound guided IVs,
Mm,
peripheral IVs. And I just used the ultrasound a ton. And now there's a new procedure called the stellate ganglion block. So because I've done all the other ultrasound stuff, whether it's placing central lines, A lines, spinal taps, cardiac echo, etc., like I have that meta skill of ultrasound use, and I can apply it to this new thing, the stellate ganglion block and the sphenopalatine ganglion block. So this applies not just in the business world, but also in the clinical world as well.
oh yeah. So is there anything that you think that this industry, that ketamine therapy things adjacent to it is going in any direction?
I mean, I'm excited that there's more people who are aware of this. I think that's the biggest thing is the knowledge dissemination of like, hey, what is ketamine and how can it work? Because 1 out of 5 people suffer from a mental health condition, at least according to the latest statistics. And we know that there is rising rates of these mental health disorders. So I think the societal knowledge based awareness is exciting. I think also for pain applications, it's very exciting. And within pain medicine, we know that especially for neuropathic forms of pain, it can be very effective in certain cases. So I'm very excited about that. I'm also excited about these other psychedelic medications that are coming out and that are being FDA approved, whether that's the psilocybin or MDMA or DMT, et cetera. Like there's more, Ibogaine is a big one. So there's all this stuff that's happening, the research, and there's more legislation that's changing around this. And my ultimate idea or hope is that we just have more options to give to our patients, right?
Mm.
Because there's just a ton of suffering in the world. There's a ton of joy in the world, but there's also a ton of suffering. And it's like, well, what can we do to alleviate a little bit of that suffering? I think that's really important.
What do you think your role is as as this industry matures?
I think our role is really just to educate and continue teaching other clinicians how to do this practice in a very safe, ethical way with a ton of integrity, legitimacy, with respect. And I think that's the real hope. I mean, we can only control what we can control. Like that's really one of my beliefs in life is like, hey, I don't have control over everything, but I have control over like what I personally do. And so I'm just really focusing on my actions, hoping that it will influence these other areas in the world. And then the other thing is the insurance side. I forgot to mention
Oh,
this is
yeah,
that
yeah,
my
that's a good
hope and
point.
vision is that insurance companies will start reimbursing fully or covering or getting in network. I know there's some clinics that are doing some workarounds. So there's just some gray areas where insurance coverage, especially depending upon what state you are in. But my hope is like all insurances will say, hey, yeah,
Mhm.
we know it's not FDA approved for this certain indication, but still it's legitimate. It works similar to like the Avastin concept, like insurance companies, even though that is used off label, I believe that they cover it.
Yeah,
And there's a
no,
ton of other,
that whole thing has evolved, and so I'm just like, I can just see that happening for this
yeah,
space.
I mean, there's a ton of medications that are already off label that are being approved by the
Yeah,
insurance firms to cover that treatment. So it's like, well, if the argument is, oh, it's not FDA approved, well, you've already done that with these other medications, and Avastin being a example of that.
mhm,
So I think that in the future, insurance will cover it because it will save them money. So if
yeah,
there's anyone listening to this who's in the insurance industry, like it's going to save y'all money. Maybe not necessarily on the like quarterly to quarterly basis, but if we think long term, like it's going to prevent a ton of stuff. It's kind of like preventative care for the acute, the worst case scenarios, right? And it's going to just relieve suffering. So it's not only going to save them money, but it's also going to reduce suffering in the long term. So that's what I'm hoping for. And I think with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you so much for staying till the very end.
we really appreciate the community that has been created around our podcast, and so if you really enjoyed today's episode or found one part of it at least intriguing, we would love it if you give a review, a 5-star one on Apple Podcast or Spotify or any of the podcast players that you subscribe to or listen to. That would help other entrepreneurial, forward-thinking individuals like yourself find us. And also, if you want to find the show notes and other related links, go to ketaminestartup.com/podcast, and there you can find it. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode.